Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cabinet Maker Profit System podcast. Guess what we talk about here? How to make money in this business. And today we're going to be talking to Sebastien DesMarais from Hollywood Woodwork. Now, he's in Hollywood, Florida, not Hollywood, California. Third generation in the woodworking business. And he's a specialist on overtime on the financial side of running a business. And I say he's a specialist because even though he's running his own company for AWI, the Architecture Woodworking Institute, he also does classes for them on financial management. Now, it's not going to be boring. He's a regular guy running a regular business, and he does a really good job of explaining finances to us. And today I want him to specifically talk to us about how the heck do you work in overtimes when you don't even know you're going to need overtime when you're estimating a job. And it's a big profit leak. You know, what we hear about on the show here is I talk about profit leaks and ways to make money or save money. Keep this in mind. My job as a business coach, my job as your leader, or my job as the host of this podcast is I want to show you how to make an extra $100 a day. But I want you to make that $100 every day of the year. So that's 365 days. So that's another $36,500. But my other job is to show you how to save $100 a day. So I want you to save an additional $36,500 a year. So you add those two together, you get a pretty significant number. Well, Sebastian's going to talk to us about making sure you're not losing money on the overtime side, that you're not missing out on an opportunity on the upside to get some of that cash back into your business. Cash is the air. It's the body. It's the what we need to breathe in the company, right? And so today, Sebastian's going to be our guest talking about that. I know you're going to love it. He's a great guest. I met him at the AWI a couple of years ago, and I always knew he'd be on the show, and here he is today. So without any more, let's get to the episode. Thanks. Mr. Sebastien DesMarais, how are you?
I'm very good, Dominic. How are you?
I'm good. Glad to have you here.
I'm glad to be here. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. I remember meeting you years ago at some conference or event. I think we're on the same tour bus going to some shop, and I'm like, I got to have that guy on the show one day.
Yeah, I think it might have been an AWI conference a few years ago.
Yeah, I think so. Yep. Yeah. And now I've got this big, juicy, hairy question here about how do we deal with overtime when we're trying to do an estimate? Because we're quoting today, but we don't know that there's going to be overtime in the future.
Yeah, the simple answer is plan for it. Somehow plan that there's going to be some, because we certainly are in an industry that tends to be hit or miss. It's a lot too much and sometimes not enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's give people your background, right? I mean, I know you got a 60,000 square foot facility. I know you do, like you did the Dolphins change room. Was it the change room, the locker room, or the whole head office?
Yeah, training facility. Yeah. They put a lot of money in there for the Dolphins last year.
But so you're that kind of, when we say cabinet maker, you're architecture millwork, but Sebastien DesMarais, who are you and how the heck is it you're talking to all these business owner cabinet makers all around the world?
Sure. Okay. Well, Hollywood Woodwork, that's the company that I'm the president at. And we were founded in 1968 and we grew from there. And it was just a series of jumps. We were in the residential world. We were in the commercial world. We've since honed in a lot on commercial construction, commercial architectural millwork, like you say.
Yeah.
And so we've been around since then. I joined the company myself in 2010. I'm a third generation here at Hollywood Woodwork.
That's rare. Third generation.
My grandfather started it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Grandfather, father, uncles, aunts, a lot of the families worked here over the years, and we are transitioning now to become 100% employee owned. So we're an ESOP, and that's where we're heading towards right now, to become 100% employee owned.
Wow.
So myself, I joined the company in 2010. So it's been 12 years now. And I joined right around a nice, sweet time in our industry, right when the recession was just full speed, which made things interesting. But we survived. We did a lot to survive in that time. We had to really look hard at everything, cost, overtimes, overheads, everything. And we did. And we've been growing since then.
Yeah. That's a lot of change. You realize how impressive it is to have a third generation business in North America? It's rare.
The chances of failure after the second and third generation, they keep on increasing. Yeah. I teach that in my financial management seminar all the time, in fact. whether it's
Yeah.
in our industry or any other.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I deal a lot with family businesses, as you'd expect. And a lot of it's that transition from first generation to second, because just we haven't been in North America that long, really. But I get my education and inspiration from over in Europe. There's a
Yeah.
podcast over there called the Family Business Podcast. I've had Russ on the show here, but it's normal that for them to have a sixth generation business that nobody's really ever heard of. You know, they make shoes or they just something, but it's six generations of a family business. And it's so unheard of over here. So it's interesting that you're in that position. So thank you. Can't wait to see what you have to say here.
Yeah, and absolutely. Going back through my history here, though, I joined the company, like I said, in 2010, and I didn't know a ton about our industry. I grew up, of course, as a child, working in the factory, working the mill, and sweeping the floors from an age of might not be legal anymore, but
To say
from
it,
an
yeah.
early age. And but then I left and I went into more of a corporate America. My background was in engineering, corporate America, and then kind of had a change in an opportunity to pivot in my life right around 2010. And that's when I came back and I pretty much had to learn the industry from scratch. And while we were a big and an established company, the way that I educated myself back then was by joining AWI. Well, our company was, but I got involved in it and I started joining all sorts of committees, and I got involved in the marketing committee and the finance committee. Eventually I made it on their board. And that's where I got a lot of my education, if you will, in woodworking, in our industry, in construction.
Right.
And so I picked up a lot of it through friends that I made there and going to seminars and conventions over the years, meeting you there. And here we are today, a few years later, chatting again about the industry.
Yeah. A couple of things you said that I want everybody else listening to the show to really catch on to. One of them is that you left. So you had a family business, but you left. Was leaving your decision, you and your family's decision? Like, how did that happen? And what do you think about the value of leaving and then coming back?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think there's a lot of value there. I left in the sense that I actually never worked here post, let's say, high school or college. I worked summers and Christmas breaks while I was here growing up, just to have a little extra side cash. But yeah, then I went to university and I studied a completely different field than construction or manufacturing or woodworking or anything like that, because I was just pursuing, something that I was interested in, something that I was passionate in. My father, who was running Hollywood Woodwork, supported it completely. And it was 5-6 years down the line, having worked in the outside world, where I think I started becoming more interested to him and to the company, because I was building some skill sets that they thought they could bring into the company. Yeah. Specifically, I was at General Electric, and so I was participating in these leadership development programs right out of college.
Oh,
and then we were doing all sorts of recruiting all around the country, and that's what Hollywood Woodwork, that's what my father and his leadership team wanted to bring in here. They said, "Hey, Sebastien, what if you joined us and develop these recruiting programs to bring in young talent to grow our organization the way a General Electric, for example, does in at that scale of 400,000 employees, even though we're only 100 employees." So it was those skills and those things that I was exposed to, having nothing to do so much with woodworking or anything, that they wanted to bring here. And so that was my first role here at the company, was developing recruiting platforms and taking over the HR function of trying to grow our team and sort of make us a little bit more structured in that side of things, that side of the business.
Yeah. I hear, I see it from the other side a lot of times when somebody's it's a family business, so they just start working in the business and they find themselves in a management position or eventually the owner. And it just is what it is. They've never had a chance to go work in another company and see how that other company operates and bring that new information in. And then it's interesting when I go and listen to these European podcasts on multi-generational family businesses, how often these multi-generation families say, you can't work here until you've gone away and had 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. That qualifies you to suddenly be in our company. So it's just a different perspective. I'm glad you went through it. And look, it is what it is. Somebody listening is going, Dom, I can't turn around now. I'm 35 and running the thing. But it just is what it is. But think about the future for yourselves as you're listening to this. What do you want your kids to do? Do you want them to have outside experience and bring it in?
Yeah. Go. No, I was just gonna say I'm part of a second generation kind of business practice group. It's also through AWI. They call it their best practice groups, and all of us are in a different position. We're all a second or third generation. Some of us, like me, went out and worked other jobs, other industries, and came back. Some did it right out of the bat, right out of high school or college, and went right into the family business. And others actually, they're not second generational in the sense that it was their family, but they were in the real world in some different industry, in two cases, in a different industry, and bought a woodworking company. All of us, and there's 8 of us in the group combined, we all came into it a different way, but we're all like a second generation from that standpoint. And they all work, but yeah, everybody has a little bit of a different path here.
Well, let me do a shameless.
I had a good friend in the industry who once said, you don't choose to do woodworking, it chooses you. And my good friend, if you're listening, you know who you are. He would say that often.
Good. He got quoted here. Well, I'm a huge fan of AWI and Doug. Doug, if you're listening, huge fan of everything you do. And so to everybody else listening, we're not promoting AWI or NKBA or CMA or CKCA or AMAC, any of those things. But I can tell you that most of the people that are on an upward trajectory in their business are members of an industry association group. And then the second thing I heard you say, which I really appreciate you saying, is you were an active participant in your chapter.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. It doesn't matter which industry association, get into one or more. And it is a big difference between signing a check for $1,000 or $2,000 every year and being a member, and actually joining the volunteer staffs, joining the committees. That's really where the magic is. You're going to give a little bit of your time and you're going to get 1,000-fold in return. And that, I can't recommend that high enough for anybody out there.
I love it. Well, good. So you're qualified to be a guest then, Sebastien. That whole thing was just to see if you knew what you're talking about.
Did I pass the test?
Yeah, you're doing okay. We'll give you another couple minutes here. Actually, the topic that I have you here for is near and dear to a lot of our hearts. And it's this overtime question. And it's a frustration. It's this dark mass, this swirling mass of open questions. How do I deal with overtime when I can't account for overtime, when I'm in the dream world of a perfect estimate? In a perfect world, everybody's going to show up. We had no equipment breakdowns. We had no material supply issues, no customers coming back to us shortening timelines. And then suddenly all of those things happen. So how do we have this overtime conversation with ourselves, or put an overtime system in place in estimating?
Yeah, there's so many different ways to combat this. It's a problem. It's a challenge in our industry, no doubt. Overtime being one of those costs that we're going to experience, whether planned or not. I think it's fair to say, though, that given the challenges, the schedule constraints that we tend to experience as a finished trade, doesn't matter what branch of woodworking you're in, doing somebody's house or doing a 60-story tower. We come in pretty much near the end. And so you're going to experience some schedule squeezes regardless. We tend to like to build in overtime right out of the beginning. During the estimate, we're figuring that a good portion of our week is going to be worked as overtime. Really? If we don't work it, great, it's a bonus, but more than likely we are going to be working it. And so we're going to build some percentage of our hours to be overtime hours anyways, with that premium added to it. And so the rates that we use when we're estimating, we're including overtime in there. We like to tell the contractor that we're not, just to have that extra cushion for ourselves, but we know we're going to have those costs at some time or another.
Yeah. The other day I was presenting to an architectural millwork group, not going to name it. You'll see why in a second. And at the end of my presentation, questions and answers, and everybody's being very polite. Some guy raises the BS flag, right? He's like, "Hey, Rubino, there's 5 of us in this room, and we all bid to the same 5 GCs in the city. It goes to the lowest price, buddy." And I understand where his question was coming from. It came across harsh, but that's not the point. The point is, like, we have to bid tight. And so if I don't bid with overtime in, and the other guy does, then I'm going to win that job. So how do you play that game where you still need to be in the ballpark, or you're not getting this job?
Yeah, definitely. We're competitively bidding too. So this is a problem for us. It's very important to qualify your bids. And so if the contractor is giving you a schedule and he's saying your bid is to be based on these dates, it's very important to go in there and say, well, if you're going to award the project to me on date A, and we're going to start our shop drawings and be done by a certain period of time, I need you to hold the 2 week lead time, 2 week turnarounds on the approvals. Now, of course, that's in the designer's hands, it's in the owner's hands. There's different people that control that, but to qualify our bid on certain key critical dates is very important. And if we get to a point in a job where we've not given the time that we planned, then we're going to say, well, you didn't give us the time that we needed to produce this job, and we might have to charge you for extra. And so we're going to actually include some kind of verbiage in our proposal to that extent. That's going to say, we need this much time. If we don't get it, we can charge more. We've even gotten to the point here where we're including allowances for the overtime that we put into the job and say, this is a built-in allowance for overtime. However, if we don't use it, meaning you kept on your schedule, we'll give it back to you. So that's another way to do it. But it's important to recognize that overtime, you can get ahead of that problem at bid time, even though you're going to experience it weeks, months, or years later when you actually execute that job.
Yeah. Better than ignoring it. I'm just saying, we'll just figure it out later.
Yeah. So we try to stay competitive by showing that we know the job, showing that we know the schedule. And then if you'd like to there's different ways to get creative with it, but our latest attempt is to put it as an allowance, saying it's in there, but you get it back if we don't need it.
Yeah. Oh, and right now finding a quality contractor is still a problem. So they know who they want to dance with. They might go get 2 or 3 bids, but all of those are companies they'd be happy to have as a supplier anyways, right?
Yeah, very true.
Okay, so here's the next question. I obviously don't want you to give away your number, but how do I find my number?
Well, there's a few different ways to do that. You can go back into your history and see how much overtime you've worked. We happen to have an account in our chart of accounts that is for overtime premium, and we track that. And in fact, we track it as an overhead because it's very hard to allocate overtime that you're working to one job specifically. If you're working on 5 jobs in your factory, it's not just the 5th one that you got to that week that should incur all that overtime. Right. So for that reason, we actually track the premium portion of overtime to a separate account. And we can say on average, we're working $50,000 in overtime a month, or it's more or less. So you can kind of look historically at your averages and build that in. We also figure it when we're selling work in the future. And if we've got a pretty full backlog at a period of time and we're bidding a new job that's in that period of time, but we want to try to squeeze it in, we know we're going to be working that job on overtime. So we're going to bid a certain amount of overtime built into that job. And the opposite might happen. We might be looking at a period of time in the future where we don't have a lot of work. And we're actually going to take all the overtime out of there because we don't have a lot of work already. And we need to be extra competitive to make sure that we get that job. Right. And so those are times where actually we might even strip out any overtime premium and be tighter on our number.
So thank you for that. And see how we danced around what's your exact number, because your number doesn't matter. Everybody might be curious as to what it is, but it's irrelevant. And I don't mean it's irrelevant to you. How you get the number is relevant. And I really appreciate what you said. You went back and looked at your history. And so folks listening to the show, you've heard me talk about this before. The end of job report, which is like an autopsy on past jobs, the dashboard that tells you, just your operating metrics, not your financials per se, but your operating metrics is going to tell you, look, over the last 3 years, we've had this much overhead. I'll bet you next year's kind of the same. So we can now back it into, and I'd like you to argue with me if I'm wrong. We can now back it into a reasonable and educated assumption as to what that's going to look like on this next month, day, week, hour.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because you said 2 things there. There's overtimes and there's overheads. And what I call overhead is anything that's not a direct cost to my job, right? It's supporting my factory. It's the cost of the factory itself. It's the cost of the machinery or the depreciation usually. It's the utilities. It's the rags. It's all those things that we need to support that.
It's the toner
operation.
And the printer, everything.
That's not the printers. It's those are all what I call overhead cost. You also have operating expenses, which is the office, usually your sales, general, and administrative expenses.
Yeah.
But everything that's supporting the factory, supporting the overhead, the office, sorry, these are all indirect costs that you need to pay for with the projects that you have. And so there's a pretty simple equation out there, and I teach it in the financial management seminar that I do. It's the indirect costs that you have, whatever that is, in a monthly time period. Let's say your indirect costs are $100,000.
Okay.
Divide that by the margin that you're trying to sell your jobs at, and it tells you the revenue that you need to break even. So it's a pretty simple equation, which is indirect cost divided by margin equals break even revenue. And so in the example I gave you, let's see if I can do this real quick without messing up. I'm doing this on the fly here, Dom.
I'm writing like a madman. So
$100,000. Let's just say that's your company's monthly overhead,
right,
divided by, let's say you're in there at a 20% margin. It says 500,000. So you need to sell $500,000 of work at a 20% margin to break even.
Right.
And so I recommend that everybody, does that analysis, and then baked into that overhead is your overtime. So I'm trying to bring us back to our theme here of overtime.
Right.
But it all starts by looking historically at what your costs to run your operation are, and making sure that you're building that into your margins for how much sales and revenue you plan to have as a company.
Yeah. I think you're from a multi-generation family business. And so you guys were doing, I'm going to be, you guys were doing well enough to stay open by the time you arranged. But there's lots of guys listening here, people listening here, men and women, who are running the business and they're getting the next kitchen, they're getting the next, restaurant they're building out, whatever millwork package they're doing. And they're like, we don't really keep track of our numbers, Sebastien, Dom. We don't keep track. And I'm going to plead with you, it's time to start. Even if you suck at it, even if you do it badly, start, because you'll get better as time goes on, right?
Yeah, I was just this past Friday, I'm a day off of it, but I was presenting, and I mentioned it briefly, but the AWI Financial Management Seminar, I presented a couple times a year, and there was 15 or so participants. We're up in East Pennsylvania. It was at their chapter, and I asked the room, I said, what's your background in finance or accounting? And here we are in a financial management seminar. Yeah, it was zero.
It's zero.
Everybody had a bit
Absolutely.
of a different background, and none had that. But first of all, the first thing I said is that you're doing right is you're here, you're working on it, you're investing in yourself. And the other thing is, I said, just pick one or two small things. We talked about a lot of things in 2 days. Just pick one or two small things, go back and make your business a little bit stronger with those things. And so, yeah, you got to start somewhere. Even if you don't have a lot of time to devote to this, starting with a couple small things, investing in yourself, and a little bit of that knowledge is very useful.
Yeah. I mean, it's no secret, I'm a business coach, right? And I work with owners who want to make their business more than it is right now. And I remind them, look, over the course of a year, you're going to make 52 small changes in the business. To be honest, it kind of doesn't matter what they are. It's like taking a fat kid to the gym. I don't care if you get on the bike or you go swimming or you run, like something is going to change, right? But if you make those little changes, guess what? You start to get fitter, you start to lose weight, you start to feel better. It's the same thing in a business. If you make just one small change, but make it in the next 24 hours, and then you keep doing that again and again and again, you're then a company who makes changes and you get the results.
I like calling it the power of 1%. 1% improvements, whether it's increasing your price by 1% or lowering your cost of materials by 1%, reducing your amount of rework by 1%. They all have pretty huge effects in the end,
massive,
especially if you're doing it a little bit.
Yeah, right. And I know you like the financial side, but that's the compounding effect of a number of different things happening again and again in a business. And then, of course, to those of you listening, it's going to be hard in the beginning. You're going to get resistance. People are going to say, we don't need to do that. People are going to say, we're too small to care. As the owner, we need to bring people forward, make the small changes, and help them make those small changes.
Yeah. And think about it. It doesn't matter how you got to this industry. We're all here. We're all doing it. At the end of the day, accounting is the language of business. And you may not like it, but to spend a little bit of time learning how to read your financials, how to read your income statement, your balance sheet, it's really worth it. And I teach it in our seminar. I said the balance sheet is the least understood. It's the hardest to really comprehend and take action out of but it's actually probably the most important one. It's your business's RPM gauge. It tells you if you're in the green zone, if you're starting to redline your engine. And so understanding that balance sheet, wherever you go to get that, I think would be a really good starting point. Even if it's a company owner, asking their CPA to explain it to them and walk a few things by them. Little things like that can start to make a difference.
Yeah. So my problem with financials is I don't like looking at an Excel spreadsheet, but I do like looking at graphs. And so maybe the big takeaway for people here is contact your finance person, your financial person, and say, hey, can you just show me these things as graphs and charts? And just start to get a sense of, oh, wow, this much of the circle is overheads. So when I flick the lights on January 1st, my shop is a man. This is the way I say it. I try to keep things very simple. Imagine that your shop is a man you've got to pay for per hour. There's a cost for that man, right? Man, woman, you know what I mean? Like it's a person. So when you flick the lights on January 1st, that clock starts ticking. That person, that shop needs an hourly salary or hourly wage. What is that? But if you can have that represented as a pie chart, that might really help you to understand, wow, it's that much. Adhesives are only this little much, right?
Yeah. Chase where the money's at. And yeah, I like the visual pieces. Anything that can be turned into a visual is easier to understand. But look at our industries. About 33% of it, 35% of it is materials. So right there, you know that if you tackle materials, you're going to have a 35% improvement in your company. Labor tends to be another 15 to 25, 30%, depending on how much installation you're doing.
Right.
So I like to do that. In fact, and I hate to keep on going back to it, but AWI offers a benchmarking survey, which is benchmarking the average cost in our industry.
Yeah.
And what I do is I stack, when you participate in that survey, you get the results back, which says the average company in our industry spends this much on materials, spends this much on factory labor, spends this much on overhead. And they break it all down into small bits and pieces. You get to see where it is that your company is making or losing more money relative to the averages in the industry. And then out of 100 different line items, you get to pick one or two or three where you got the most opportunity, the biggest bang for your buck, which is where you want to spend your energy. So I like to argue by participating in any kind of benchmarking survey, instead of just taking shots in the dark of where you can save money or where you can make more money, do it with a sort of a data-driven approach that tells you where you should spend the most of your energy.
Facts.
There's a bigger bang for your buck.
Yeah. I'm getting the same report as well. So Doug and Sue Sicilian are helping me out with, I need that report.
Yeah.
You have to have the facts, the data. We can, for me to make things very simple, it takes a lot to, you have to understand a lot to make it sound simple. The same as when you're starting an apprentice in your shop. You can tell them everything, or you can just tell them the thing they need right now to get to the next step and then build on that. And what we all need to have is the data. Thank God there's data. There's other industries that don't have the data or that don't share the data. And then there's people who don't participate to find out the data. This sounds like a big ad for AWI, and I hope it does.
It's the cost of doing business survey. And I've had people join AWI and say this alone is worth the cost of the membership, because the value you get out of it really helps you hone in on your business and your cost and say, hey, and it's kind of depressing, but the average margin in our industry last year wasn't very great. It was pretty tight. But, it at least shows you where you are relative to the average and how you can improve.
Yeah. Sorry, I have an evil smile right now. Because the average means that 50% of people did less, but 50% of people did better.
Exactly.
And so it's actually not hard to do better than the average. And by the way, not a low number. We can make some really good money in this industry.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The average or the median is what's presented, and then after that, I love the tranche that shows the high quartile companies. So basically, the top 25% companies in the industry, and you wouldn't be surprised to hear that it's about 12% on average. So over a 30-year period, there's a company. There's the average has been between 1% and 6% operating margin. Yet there's always a high profit company or high profit quartile, a 25% of that industry that's making about 12% more than that.
And why is
so
that?
that starts to get into nice dollars, right? 13 to 18% margin. Yeah.
I had a client say to me, "We did too good on this job. I think I should tell the builder and give some money back." And I'm like, "Pump
Please
the
no.
brakes. What are you doing? Don't do that." He's like, "Oh, I feel
Yeah.
bad." I go, "Well, I don't feel bad for the last 7, 8, or 9 years. You really struggled to get by. And so you did really well on a job. Okay. The world recognized that you've been working at this for X many years."
Yeah. Go back, look at what you did right, and try to turn that into a rinse and repeat. Yeah. Do it again.
Do it again. Do it again. Yeah. So this is interesting when we're talking about overtime. Sorry, when we're talking about overtime, it really comes back to understanding our history, what we've done on other jobs, so that I can apply some sort of number to the future.
Yeah. And what you need for that is really a good job costing system. You need some kind of software that allows you to capture all your costs from around your projects, whether that's in the factory, on the job site, your engineering cost, project management. To
Yeah.
have some kind of system that allows you to capture your time, the labor real time, capture
Right.
your materials is extremely important to being able to do that job cost analysis that you were talking about earlier. Go back and say, how did we do? Did we
Yeah.
estimate enough in this scope of work, or too much, or not enough? And tweaking your process from there. By having a good system to capture time allows you to see where
Oh,
you're even spending on overtime and things like that.
yeah.
Software is a must these days, especially as we're trying to grow and scale our businesses. So I'd recommend investing in a good job costing software, whatever it is that you choose.
Yeah. So I don't want you to share which job costing software you use because it's irrelevant, actually.
Yep, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't
Just
matter.
do it.
But here, I don't know if you know this number, but I just wrote this down. How many evolutions of job cost software do you think Hollywood Woodwork has gone through to get here? Like, are you on your second one or are you on your 20th?
Well, we used to do it manually, like everybody did at some point
Okay,
or
so you
another.
started manual, right?
Yep. And so that was probably pre 2000s. And we started in our first ERP type software packages in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
We went through one, two, and now we're on our third. So we did manual, two different softwares. Now we're on the third software. And, they all get a little bit better. They all get a little bit more industry specific because that helps too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's certainly a good starting point. Automating your time collection in the shop. In fact, I was touring some people not too long ago, and they're still collecting their time manually, and then having somebody else plug it into some kind of system. So putting some kind of devices out. I mean, we live in the world of iPads and computers are easy to come by. So putting some kind of device where your people can clock in real time to a job, to a work order, even better.
It's amazing what kind of data that gives us when people are clocking in and out of jobs.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, I had a job just a little while ago where the foreman forgot to clock out. So he'd been on a job for 36 hours by the time he came back on the Monday. But you can laugh about it and then say to everybody, hey, listen, don't forget to log in and log out. And I still call it T-sheets. QuickBooks Time. Simple. Most people, and I'm not promoting any of those. There's just choose a system. But the reason I asked you the question is choose a system and get into it and understand at some point you're going to evolve and you're going to go further and further into the future.
Yeah.
It'll get you there.
Start small and build it up like building blocks.
Yeah. Sebastien, this has been fantastic, like really good. I love the insight you have and the confidence that you talk about this. Obviously, you're into the numbers. Not everybody's into the numbers, and that's fine, but I like how you walk us through it. If somebody wants to find you in this big wide world, how do we do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on, there's our website, hollywoodwoodwork.com. It's got my contact information on there. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn. That's a good way to get me. And I'd be glad to answer anybody's questions out there.
Or join the AWI.
Definitely.
The financial management course.
Join AWI, join any kind of industry association, whatever's most relevant to your business. You're going to get education out of there. You're going to meet people. You're going to learn from them. Take a little bit of time in doing things like that. Like I said, I was last week teaching a financial management seminar to a bunch of business owners, or in some cases, not even owners, but just people that were, in a leadership role in the organization. And we had a good time. We all learned a lot. I learned from the people in the room, and hopefully I was able to pass on a little bit something to them. And So I recommend, yeah, getting into an industry association, going to the education offerings that they offer.
Mm.
If it even better if they offer a benchmarking survey, like the cost of doing business surveys, the one that AWI does. I'm sure every industry association has a little version of that, and well worth your time.
Yeah, definitely. Because then you've got something to hang your hat on. At least you know the number. Now you can figure out how to get there.
Yep.
All right, Sebastien, thank you so much. I have a feeling we're going to invite you back on the show at some point in the future.
I'd be glad to
All
anytime.
right. All right. Thanks, man. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, Sebastien, I have to say thank you very much for being a guest and sharing your wisdom, your insight, the sum total of how many painful hours you spent at the office trying to figure this thing out on your own, and then just turning around and sharing it with everybody. Thank you. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. It's guys like you that share the information that have an impact on this world. So thank you. Folks, there was a ton of great info here today. I've got a ton of notes, but here's a couple of the high points that I found. I wonder what you found. One of them was, and we're talking about overtime here, right? Build it in up front. So make sure that you're thinking about that overtime up front and making a conscious decision as to how that's going to impact your bid, right? Number two, have some verbiage, have some wording in your proposal to charge more if you're getting pushback or if they're sliding their schedule and making it impact you. As Sebastien pointed out, we're at the end of the construction process, right? And so a lot of other calendars have slid forward and it's starting to impact us, but they still want to hand over the keys on a certain date. And now we get squeezed. So have some verbiage in your proposal. Number three, the history. Your company actually already knows how much overtime you're going to be charging next month and next year. Your company knows all that, but have you gone to ask your company? And you're going to find that out by looking at your history. Now, folks, here on everything, if you work with me as a coach, then you'll recognize this language. If you've listened to the podcast for any amount of time, you're going to recognize this. We talk about the end of job report, which was also called the Leprechaun report when I wrote about it in Forbes magazine. We talk about the dashboard, which is a simple way to look at your operational numbers, not the profit and loss and balance sheet that Sebastien was talking about, although the numbers do feed in a couple of places. But when you have all of those numbers in front of you, it's a dashboard, just like in your car or if you're flying an airplane. It's a dashboard. It tells you all of the critical information at a glance so that you can guide this company in a way that's kind of boring. You just remove all the drama. You put simple systems in place to help you build this business and move it forward. Obviously, that's what I do as a business coach, and I've been doing this for a long time. So you strip out a bunch of things, you put systems in place to make it easy to understand. And when you need to dig into something, for instance, overtime, then you've got the information there that you need to. And one of the final questions we asked Sebastien here was job costing software. I actually don't care what software he uses, and I don't think you care either. What was important here is how many iterations or how many evolutions of that software has he gone through? And I don't think he could even keep track. He said first it was manual, and then he started to put in some other systems. But what he also said is between manual and other software, he started to do time tracking. Are you doing time tracking right now? Are you having trouble with your guys tracking time? If you are, then that's the project I want you to work on this week, or let's say until the next episode comes out. Really get back into your shop and make sure people are tracking their time. Make sure you're confident in that time that they're tracking against jobs, because that's how you start to build this data, this information that's going to help you figure out the overtime. Because if you're not figuring it out, if it's not being charged back to the customer in some way, shape, or form, then guess who's paying for it? And it ain't you, buddy. It's your kids' braces. It's the gifts you're going to be able to put under your kids' tree. It's the fact that you wanted a 40-foot boat and you could only buy a 20-foot boat. It's the fact that you wanted a new truck this year, but now you got to wait 2 more years. That's who's paying if we're not charging overhead properly. Remember, when somebody contracts you to build something for them, whether it's kitchen cabinets, whether it's a vanity, whether it's an entire, what did he say here? He did the whole change room or the whole facility for the Miami Dolphins. They're renting your company to do this job. And there's costs associated with that. So make sure you're charging those costs appropriately. Does that mean you're going to lose some jobs? Absolutely. Does it mean you should have lost those jobs? Absolutely. All right. Listen, thank you for checking in. There was so much other stuff here from Sebastien. The formula for how to figure out your break even is something you've probably done before. If you haven't, if you have questions, if you're really at a loss as to where to start, let me just say this in case it's not obvious. I'm here to help. Just get in touch with me. Send me a text message. My cell phone, my personal cell is 604-837-8361. Just send me a text and just say, Dom, let's talk. And then you know what we'll do? We'll talk. All right, stay tuned. The next portion of this episode is called Story Time with Dom. Although we are changing it in the future, it's going to be called Questions and Answers with Dom. You'll learn more about that as we go forward. This outro's gone too long. I'm going to cut it here, but we'll see you in the next piece of the show. Thanks. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Questions and Answers with Dom. Today, we're doing a question on behalf of B Displays. Now, Rob is the owner of B Displays out of Newcastle, UK. Some of you have already seen this message on the Contractor Strategy Group Facebook page. And he posted it right there after Brian Steinhardt's question. So I'm going to read his question here word for word, and then I'll stop recording. Then I'll go and open up a new recording screen and give us an answer. Here's Rob's question. I currently have two guys working for me and both aren't quite cutting the mustard. I feel like I'm constantly saying, this is wrong and that's wrong, blah, blah, blah. At some point, something's going to burst. And at the moment, it feels like me. Kind regards, Rob. All right, Rob, thanks for that. I appreciate it. Let's record this for future fantasticness, and I'll record an answer as well. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Questions and Answers with Dom. We're going to be answering a question from Rob at B Displays over in Newcastle, UK. It's great to have you as a member there, and thank you very much for asking the question. We just heard the question here, and so, let me summarize. You've got a couple of guys on your crew, so you're growing and trying to grow, but they're just not cutting the mustard. And I assume what you mean by that is they're not up to par for what your expectations are. So I've made a note to myself to keep these segments short and punchy because I find that it turns out, folks, that I could, once I've got a microphone, I don't like to put it down. So I'm going to try and keep this a little punchier. I've broken this into two major segments for you, Rob. Number one is the big question. And number two is, what do I stand for? In this case, you. What do you stand for? So let's deal with the big question first, right? You've got a couple guys in your crew. They're not cutting the mustard. They're not meeting your standards. The first thing I want you to do, and this is a tough question, but you're going to have to answer it guts first. I'm going to ask you a question about both of these people's attitude. Are they worth keeping? And that's either a yes or no answer. There's no fuzziness in the middle. Are they worth keeping? Do they have the right attitude? Do they show up with the right mindset? If they don't, it's just not going to get better. I don't know how else to tell you that. It's like taking the wrong measurements and expecting everything to turn out fine. Now, if their attitude is wrong, then you're going to have to replace them at some point. And I'll leave that up to you at your discretion. And when do you do that? That's another discussion. Not going to get into it here because, as we know, I could, and it would go on a long time. The second question, or the second part of the answer, I should say, is, what do I stand for? And you may have heard me say this before, folks, but I learned this from some ranching friends many, many years ago. If I stand for nothing, I will fall for anything. If I stand for nothing, I'll fall for anything. And so the question I want to put in front of you, Rob, is, what do I stand for? And you might go, Dom, I don't know. I stand for quality, and I want to make sure I keep my promises to my clients. And my Lord, I'm trying to make some money here. Okay, that's great. But there are three things that I want you to ask yourself on paper. So, Rob, when you're listening to this, pause the episode and write down these three questions. And then I want you to write down the answers. And that's going to help you with the end of this exercise. So the first thing is, we're going to list your rules. So the first thing you're going to do is, what frustrates you about the company? And write down anything you want. What frustrates you about the company? What frustrates you about your people? What frustrates you about the quality of these two gentlemen's work? I'm assuming they're both men. The second thing is, what do your customers love about you? What have they said in the past? Do they say, oh, you guys are so attentive, you always answer the phone real quick, you guys do great work, whatever that is, write that down as well. And the last thing is, how are you better? How is B Displays better than anybody else in the market? Be proud, write that thing down. Now you've got a list based on those three items. That list now needs to become a list of rules for how things operate in your company. Now, if you want a list of job site rules, Rob, because you messaged me on Facebook, I already sent you the attachment, the list of job site rules. So you have a sort of a cheat sheet, a starter sheet for how to do that. Those of you who have already downloaded the book, Construction Millionaire Secrets, we're talking about the list of job site expectations. It's also a free PDF there. And if you don't have it, and if you want it from me, folks, just go ahead and text me 604-837-8361 and just say job site rules. And then we'll send that off to you so you have some reference point so that you can build your own list of job site expectations. But you got to do that based on who you are and what you stand for. Because if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for, I'll let you finish the sentence. Rob, thank you so much for sending the question in. I really appreciate it. I appreciate taking the time, and I hope this was valuable. Thanks, folks.